Olivia Bennett stood in the hospital corridor, her hands trembling as she clutched the medical bill. The numbers blurred before her eyes, each zero feeling like another nail in the coffin of her hopes. 23 years old, and her entire world had collapsed in the space of 3 months. Her mother, Margaret, lay in the room behind her, fighting pneumonia that had evolved into something far worse. The doctors spoke in careful tones about experimental treatments, about options that insurance would never cover. She walked to the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance like false promises. Once upon a time, she had dreamed of becoming a celebrated painter, of galleries showcasing her work, of traveling the world with nothing but a canvas and her imagination. Now, those dreams felt like stories from someone else's life. The art supplies in her tiny apartment gathered dust while she worked double shifts at a coffee shop, barely making enough to survive. A stranger's proposition. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under her apartment door with no return address. Inside, a single card with elegant lettering and a phone number. The message was brief but impossible to ignore. For those who need a solution to impossible problems, discretion guaranteed. Call before midnight. Olivia had thrown it away 3 times. Each time, she found herself digging it out of the trash, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. What kind of solution could a stranger offer? The practical side of her brain screamed warnings about scams and dangers, but the part of her that watched her mother fade a little more each day whispered something different. That evening, as rain hammered against her window, she dialed the number. A smooth, professional voice answered immediately. "Miss Bennett, we have been waiting for your call." The fact that they knew her name should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a strange calm settle over her shoulders. What is this about? An opportunity. Tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock, the Westbrook Tower, penthouse level. Come alone, wear something appropriate for a business meeting. The line went dead before she could ask any questions. Olivia sat in the darkness of her apartment, rain drumming a rhythm that matched her racing heart. She had crossed some invisible threshold, and there would be no going back. The man who bought everything. The Westbrook Tower pierced the sky like a shard of glass and ambition. Olivia felt small as she stepped into the marble lobby, her only professional dress suddenly feeling shabby among the gleaming surfaces. The elevator ride to the top floor lasted an eternity, her reflection in the polished doors showing a young woman trying desperately to appear brave. When the doors opened, she stepped into another world. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city sprawled below like a kingdom of lights. The penthouse was minimalist and cold, all sharp angles and expensive emptiness. And there, silhouetted against the window, stood Julian Westbrook. She had seen his face in business magazines, always stern and unreachable. In person, he was even more intimidating. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from stone. His eyes, when they finally met hers, were the color of winter storms. "Miss Bennett," his voice was deep, controlled, each word measured. "Please, sit." She lowered herself onto a leather chair that probably cost more than her entire apartment. Julian remained standing, studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "You understand you need money, a substantial amount." It was not a question. Olivia's throat felt dry. "How did you know about my situation?" "I make it my business to know things." He moved to a bar cart, poured 2 glasses of something amber. He offered her one, which she accepted with shaking hands. "Your mother's medical bills total approximately $300,000. Your rent is 4 months overdue. You have $17 in your checking account." The accuracy of his knowledge should have frightened her. Instead, she felt a strange relief that someone finally understood the weight she carried. "Why do you care about my problems?" Julian took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze never leaving her face. "I need something you can provide. In return, I will solve every financial concern you have, permanently."
What could I possibly have that a billionaire needs? He set down his glass with deliberate care. A wife. The word hung in the air between them like smoke. Olivia blinked, certain she had misheard. Excuse me? I need a wife, for business purposes. My investors, my board, they believe a married man is more stable, more trustworthy. I have resisted this expectation for years, but circumstances have changed. He pulled a folder from his desk, thick with papers. This is a contract. You would become my wife in every legal sense. You would live in my home, attend events at my side, play the role of devoted spouse. This is insane. Olivia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You want to buy a fake marriage? Nothing fake about the legal binding. Julian's expression remained unchanged. The contract is for 2 years. At the end, we divorce quietly. You walk away with $5 million, all your debts cleared, and a trust fund for your mother's care for the rest of her life. The number made her dizzy. $5 million. Her mother saved. A future that did not involve drowning in debt. All she had to do was pretend to love a man who looked at her like she was a business transaction. Why me? Her voice came out as a whisper. You could have anyone. For the first time, something shifted in Julian's expression. Not quite warmth, but perhaps the shadow of something human. Because you are desperate enough to say yes, smart enough to follow the rules, and ordinary enough that no one will question why I chose you. You are perfect precisely because you are not from my world. The words should have insulted her. Instead, they felt like the truth, cold and clear. She thought of her mother's labored breathing, of the doctor's carefully neutral faces, of the apartment she was about to lose, of all the dreams she had already buried. I need time to think. You have until midnight tonight. After that, the offer disappears. Julian handed her the folder. Read the contract. Every clause is negotiable except one. For 2 years, you belong to me, completely. She clutched the folder to her chest and fled to the elevator, her heart hammering against her ribs. In the safety of the descending car, she opened the contract. The legal language swam before her eyes, but certain phrases jumped out. Total discretion required. No romantic relationships outside the marriage. Public displays of affection as needed for appearances. The wedding that shook her soul. At 11:45 that night, Olivia called the number. I accept. 3 days later, she stood in a courthouse in a simple white dress she had bought from a department store clearance rack. Julian wore a carchol suit that probably cost more than a car. There were no guests, no flowers, no music, just a bored judge, 2 strangers as witnesses, and words that bound them together. I do, Julian's voice said, flat and emotionless. When it was her turn, Olivia looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw nothing but ice. I do. The judge pronounced them husband and wife. Julian leaned in for the required kiss, his lips touching hers with all the warmth of a business handshake. But for just a moment, just a heartbeat, she felt his hand tighten on her waist, felt something flicker in his eyes that looked almost like regret. Then it was over. She was Olivia Westbrook, wife to a billionaire, bound by contract to a man who bought her like he bought everything else in his perfectly controlled life. As they walked out into the afternoon sun, her new wedding ring heavy on her finger, she wondered what she had truly agreed to. Julian opened the door of his black car, his expression unreadable. Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Westbrook. She slid into the leather seat, the door closing with an expensive whisper. Through the tinted window, she watched her old life recede. There was no going back now. She had signed the contract, spoken the vows, accepted the ring. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the same courage that had brought her this far. The car pulled away from the courthouse, carrying her towards a future she could not imagine, beside a man she did not know, into a world where love was a contract and marriage was just another business deal. But somewhere in her chest, beneath the fear and uncertainty, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, some agreements were meant to be broken.
The Westbrook estate sprawled across 5 acres of manicured perfection, a modern fortress of glass and steel that made Olivia feel like an intruder in a museum. Julian's car swept through iron gates that closed behind them with a finality that made her chest tighten. The mansion rose before them, all sharp angles and enormous windows that reflected the sky like mirrors hiding secrets. Thomas, Julian's assistant, waited at the entrance. He was a man in his 50s with kind eyes that seemed out of place in this cold world. "Welcome home, Mrs. Westbrook," he said with genuine warmth, and Olivia felt tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness. Julian led her through rooms that felt more like showrooms than living spaces. Everything was pristine, untouched, as if no one actually lived here. "Your bedroom is on the 2nd floor, east wing," he said, his tone businesslike. "Mine is in the west wing. We maintain separate spaces." "Separate bedrooms?" The words escaped before she could stop them. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "This is a business arrangement, Olivia, not a real marriage. I thought that was clear." The use of her first name, clinical and distant, stung more than she expected. She nodded, swallowing the strange disappointment that rose in her throat. What had she expected? Romance? This man had purchased a wife like he might purchase art for his walls. The woman in designer armor. Her first week passed in a blur of awkward silence and careful distance. Julian left before dawn each morning, returned after dark, and communicated through Thomas when necessary. Olivia wandered the enormous house like a ghost, discovering room after room of expensive emptiness. A library with books that looked unread, a gym that gleamed with disuse, a music room with a grand piano covered in dust. She spent her days visiting her mother, who had been transferred to a private hospital, where doctors spoke of recovery instead of end-of-life care. Margaret's eyes had regained their sparkle, and she believed Olivia's story about a sudden inheritance. The lie sat heavy in Olivia's stomach, but watching her mother laugh again made it bearable. On Friday evening, Thomas knocked on her door with a garment bag. "Mr. Westbrook requests your presence at a charity gala tomorrow night. These are for you." Inside the bag hung a gown that made Olivia gasp, deep emerald silk that caught the light like water, with a neckline that was elegant without being revealing, shoes that probably cost more than her old car, jewelry that came with its own security guard. "I cannot wear these," she whispered, touching the fabric with trembling fingers. Thomas smiled gently. "Mr. Westbrook has very specific standards for appearances. You represent him now. Everything must be perfect." The words were meant to be helpful, but they reminded Olivia of what she truly was. Not a wife, a prop, a carefully dressed doll to complete Julian's image. The night everything shifted. The gala was held in a ballroom that looked like something from a fairy tale, all crystal chandeliers and golden light. Olivia stood beside Julian, her hand resting lightly on his arm as they greeted an endless parade of wealthy strangers. He introduced her with the same flat tone he used for everything else. "My wife, Olivia." She smiled until her face ached, made small talk about nothing, and felt like a fraud with every breath. These people belonged to a world she could never truly enter. Their casual mentions of vacation homes and charity donations exceeded her entire former yearly income. "You are doing well," Julian murmured during a brief moment alone. It was the first personal thing he had said to her all evening. "I feel like an imposter," she admitted quietly. Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify. "We are all imposters here. The trick is making them believe the performance." Before she could respond, a woman approached them. Tall and striking, with platinum hair and eyes like chips of ice, she moved with the confidence of someone who owned every room she entered. "Julian, darling, you have been hiding from me." "Victoria," Julian's voice went even colder, which Olivia had not thought possible. "This is my wife, Olivia. Olivia, this is Victoria Ashford, my business partner." Victoria's smile was sharp as broken glass.
How delightful. I had no idea Julian was even seeing anyone, and suddenly he is married. How did you two meet? It must be quite a story. Through mutual friends, Julian said smoothly, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly on Olivia's waist. A private ceremony seemed appropriate. How romantic, Victoria purred, her tone suggesting she found it anything but. We must join us for dinner next week. I am dying to get to know the woman who finally captured Julian's heart. The word heart was delivered with such mockery that Olivia felt her cheeks burn. But before she could respond, Julian pulled her closer. We will check our schedule. As Victoria glided away, Olivia felt the tension radiating from Julian's body. She knows, she whispered. She knows this is fake. Victoria suspects everything. It is her nature. He steered her towards the dance floor as music swelled through the room. We need to look convincing. Dance with me. The dance that changed the rules. Olivia had never danced like this before, never felt a man's hand at her waist with such proprietary confidence. Julian moved with practiced ease, guiding her through steps she barely knew. This close, she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that made her head spin. You are trembling, he observed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I do not belong here, her eyes fixed on his shoulder rather than his face. Look at me, Olivia. She raised her gaze reluctantly and found herself caught in the storm of his eyes. Up close, she saw things she had missed before. Tiny lines at the corners that suggested he smiled more than his current coldness indicated. A small scar above his left eyebrow. Flecks of silver in the gray that made his eyes look almost luminous. In this moment, you belong exactly where you are. You are my wife. Act like it. The command should have angered her. Instead, something in his tone made her pulse quicken. His hand moved slightly on her waist, his thumb brushing against the silk of her gown, and she felt heat spread through her body. Why did you really marry me? The question escaped before she could stop it. His expression remained controlled, but something flickered deep in his eyes. Sometimes the truth is more complicated than a simple answer. That's not an answer at all. No, he agreed quietly. It is not. The song ended, and Julian stepped back, the moment of strange intimacy shattering like glass. He guided her off the dance floor, back into his role of distant husband, leaving Olivia more confused than ever. The secret in the study. That night, unable to sleep in her vast, empty bedroom, Olivia wandered the quiet mansion. She found herself outside Julian's study, light seeping under the closed door. She should have returned to her room, but something made her knock softly. Come in. Julian sat behind his desk, still in his tuxedo, but with the bow tie loosened and the top buttons of his shirt undone. He looked tired in a way she had never seen before, the mask of control slipping. Papers covered his desk, and a half-empty glass of whiskey within reach. I couldn't sleep, she said, feeling foolish. Neither could I. He gestured to a chair. Sit, if you want. She lowered herself into the leather seat, her gown whispering around her. The silence stretched between them, but it felt different from the cold distance of before, more comfortable, almost companionable. Victoria will cause problems, Julian said finally, his gaze fixed on the amber liquid in his glass. She wanted this marriage to be hers. We had an understanding, years ago. She believed we would eventually formalize our business partnership with a personal one. You were engaged? Never officially, but she assumed. He took a sip of whiskey. I could never give her what she wanted, what she expected. What did she want? Julian finally looked at her, and the exhaust in his eyes made him seem almost human. Love, devotion, the pretense that our marriage would be anything more than a merger of assets and ambitions. So you married me instead, someone who expects nothing. Yes, the word was brutally honest. Someone who understands this is a transaction, someone who will not demand what I cannot give. Olivia stood, her gown rustling in the quiet room. She should have felt insulted, reduced again to a convenient solution to his problems, but instead she felt something else. Sadness, not for herself, but for this powerful man who had built walls so high he couldn't see over them anymore. What happened to you? She asked softly. What made you so afraid of letting anyone close? Julian's hand tightened against his glass. For a moment, she thought he might answer. Then the mask slid back into place, his expression closing like a door slamming shut. "Good night, Olivia." She was dismissed. She walked to the door, but paused with her hand on the handle. "Everyone expects nothing from you, Julian. Maybe that's the real problem." She left before he could respond, but as she climbed the stairs to her lonely bedroom, she heard the sound of glass shattering behind her. Whether he had thrown it or simply dropped it, she couldn't tell, but something had cracked in that study, and she had the feeling neither of them would be the same. The morning after revelations. Sunlight streamed through her bedroom windows, and Olivia awoke to find Thomas at her door with breakfast on a tray. "Mr. Westbrook left early for meetings. He asked me to inform you that Victoria has invited you both to dinner on Wednesday. He has accepted on your behalf." Olivia's stomach knotted. Did he say anything else? Thomas set the tray on her bedside table, his expression kind. "May I—"
Wednesday arrived with the weight of an approaching storm. Olivia spent the afternoon preparing for dinner at Victoria's penthouse, trying on 3 different dresses before settling on a navy blue gown that felt like armor. Her hands shook as she fastened her earrings, and she caught her own nervous reflection staring back from the mirror. Julian appeared at her bedroom door, immaculate in a black suit. His eyes swept over her, and for just a moment, something like approval flickered across his face. "You look appropriate," he said, which was probably the closest thing to a compliment she would receive. The drive to Victoria's building was silent, tension thick enough to cut. Julian stared out the window, his jaw tight, and Olivia wondered what memories were playing behind those storm-gray eyes. Victoria's penthouse was the opposite of Julian's mansion, where his home felt cold and empty. Hers was warm and inviting, all rich colors and soft lighting designed to make people lower their guard. She greeted them at the door in a red dress that looked painted on, her smile bright and dangerous. "Julian, Olivia, welcome. Come in, come in. Dinner is almost ready." The evening started pleasantly enough. Victoria was a perfect hostess, charming and attentive, asking Olivia questions about her background with seemingly genuine interest. But Olivia noticed how every question was designed to highlight the differences between them. "Where did you go to school? What did your parents do? How did you spend your summers?" Each answer revealed the gulf between their worlds, and Victoria's smile grew sharper with every response. The poison in pretty words. Over dinner, Victoria turned her attention to Julian. "Do you remember that summer in Monaco when we stayed at the villa and you promised me the world?" Her laugh was light, but her eyes were calculating. "We were so young then, so full of dreams about our future together." Julian's expression remained neutral, but Olivia saw his hand tighten around his wineglass. "That was a long time ago, Victoria." "Not so long that I have forgotten." Victoria leaned forward, her gaze moving between them. "Tell me, Olivia, has Julian told you about that summer, about the promises he made, the plans we created?" "Our past is not relevant," Julian said coldly, his tone sharp enough to cut. "Oh, but it is, darling." Victoria's smile turned vicious. "Because I know you, Julian Westbrook. I know you better than anyone. And this," she gestured dismissively at Olivia, "this sudden marriage to a girl from nowhere, with no preparation, no announcement, it reeks of desperation, or worse, deception." Olivia felt her face flush with humiliation, but before she could respond, Julian stood abruptly. "We are leaving." "Running away, Julian? How unlike you." Victoria stood as well, all pretense of civility dropping away. "She deserves to know the truth about your father, about why you really needed this marriage." "Enough." The word came out like thunder, and Olivia saw something in Julian's eyes she had never seen before. Not coldness, but pain, raw and unguarded. He reached for Olivia's hand, pulling her toward the door.
"Thank you for dinner, Victoria. It will be the last one we share." As they left, Victoria's voice followed them into the hallway. "She will leave you, Julian, just like everyone else, because you are incapable of giving anyone what they truly need." The truth that breaks through ice. The car ride home was suffocating. Julian stared straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He drove too fast, taking corners with reckless precision, and Olivia gripped the door handle, afraid to speak. When they reached the mansion, Julian went straight to his study and slammed the door. Olivia stood in the foyer, her heart pounding, knowing she should go to her room, let him have his space. Instead, she followed him. She opened the study door without knocking. Julian stood by the window, a fresh glass of whiskey in his hand, his shoulders rigid with tension. "Tell me," she said quietly. "Tell me what she was talking about. Leave, Olivia. This does not concern you. I am your wife. Even if it is fake, even if it is just a contract, I deserve to know what I walked into." Julian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want the truth? Fine. My father built this empire on lies and manipulation. When he died 2 years ago, he left behind a mess of questionable deals and furious business partners. The board wanted someone they could trust, someone stable, someone married." He took a long drink, his hand shaking slightly. "They gave me an ultimatum. Get married within 6 months or they would vote me out and put Victoria in charge. She orchestrated it, of course. She thought I'd come crawling back to her, desperate enough to accept her terms." "So you found me instead?" Olivia whispered, understanding dawning. "Yes, someone who needed money badly enough to agree, someone with no connections to my world who could not use the position against me." He finally turned to face her, and the anguish in his eyes stole her breath. "Someone who would leave when the contract ended without demanding pieces of my soul I no longer have to give." The confession that changed everything. Olivia crossed the room slowly, stopping a few feet from him. "Tell me, what happened that summer in Monaco? What did Victoria mean?" Julian closed his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I was 25. My father was grooming me to take over. Victoria and I were together, and I believed I loved her. We talked about marriage, about building something together. Then my mother got sick." He opened his eyes, and Olivia saw tears threatening to fall. "Cancer. Aggressive and fast. She had 6 months. I dropped everything to be with her, moved her into my apartment, hired the best doctors, spent every moment I could at her side." "Where was your father?" "Working. Always working. He visited twice in those 6 months. Twice." The bitterness in his voice was corrosive. "And Victoria was no better. She called it morbid, said I was wasting my time on someone who was dying anyway. She wanted me at parties, at business dinners, building our future." Julian set down his glass with trembling hands. "My mother died alone while I was at a meeting Victoria insisted I attend. She said it was crucial for my career. I got the call from the hospice nurse, and when I arrived, my mother had been gone for 2 hours. Olivia felt tears sliding down her own cheeks. "Julian, I'm so sorry." I broke it off with Victoria that night, told her I never wanted to see her again. She laughed and said I was being emotional, that I would come back when I realized she was my only option. He looked at Olivia with such vulnerability it hurt. I swore I would never let anyone close enough to hurt me again, never let anyone demand pieces of myself I could not afford to give. "So you built walls," Olivia said softly. "Walls are safer. Walls do not abandon you when things get difficult." Olivia moved closer, close enough to touch him but not quite daring. "I lost my father when I was 15. Heart attack, sudden and brutal. One day he was there, the next he was gone. My mother fell apart. I had to become the adult, the strong one. I learned to bury my feelings, to pretend everything was fine while my world crumbled." Julian looked at her with new understanding. "We are both good at hiding." "Yes, But hiding doesn't make the pain go away, it just makes us lonely. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and placed her hand over his heart. You are not empty, Julian. You are scared. There's a difference. For a long moment, they stood frozen in that charged space between distance and connection. Then Julian's hand covered hers, pressing it more firmly against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, rapid and strong. You are dangerous, he whispered. You make me want things I swore I would never want again. What things? Instead of answering, he pulled her close and kissed her. It was nothing like the cold, perfunctory kiss at their courthouse wedding. This was fire and desperation, years of locked-away feeling pouring through broken walls. Olivia kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian rested his forehead against hers. This complicates everything. Maybe some things are supposed to be complicated. He laughed, and it was the first genuine sound of happiness he had heard from him. The contract says no emotional involvement, no real relationship. Then maybe the contract was wrong. She pulled back enough to look into his eyes. Maybe some agreements are meant to be broken. Julian cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. I cannot promise you forever. I cannot promise I know how to do this right. I've been cold for so long, I don't know if I remember how to be warm. Then we learned together. No more walls, no more hiding. Olivia smiled through her tears. 2 years is not enough, Julian. I want more. I want real. The morning that brought war. They talked through the night, sitting on the floor of his study, sharing stories and secrets they had kept locked away. Olivia learned about his childhood, about a child whose father measured worth